Welcome to one of the final World Championship match lectures. Is that right, Ben? Maybe? Yeah. I think we've done every match, so we're going to do other stuff at some point. And also, since this will never be shown, it doesn't matter. So I decided to do the match between Lasker and Marshall. Marshall was a good American player, but normally when he played in events with Capablanca and Lasker and Alyakin, he wasn't winning them. Not normally. Also, Marshall liked to play wild and crazy, so the games are pretty interesting. So I have a couple of games at a position from the match, which I found good. In fact, it describes here Kasparov's description. In Cambridge Springs 1904, Marshall had 11 wins, 4 draws, and no losses. And they said, hey, he should play Lasker. And then after he played Lasker, they wanted their money back. So yeah, Lasker, 8 wins, 7 draws, no losses. And that was actually quite common 100, 150 years ago. The world champion in playing a world championship match preferred to play somebody they would beat, because then you'd be the world champion still. And you don't get to do that nowadays. You got to play who they tell you to play, and that person might beat you. I mean, not recently, but. So Lasker Marshall, was Marshall the second best player in the world? No, probably not even top 5, maybe top 10, maybe. Okay, so the first game was, this is the first game of the match, and they played a Rue Lopez, and he played D4. Otherwise, we could have seen the Berlin, over 100 years ago, but okay. The opening theory in 1907 was slightly different than now. Now, everybody would either castle or play D3 here. I've been advocating for D3 for years, and finally some of the super GMs are listening, but castles is still more common. D4 is an interesting move. Marshall liked to play the interesting move, although in the last game I'm going to show you, it looks like Marshall's a beginner, but okay, the first 2 games are okay. Bishop E7, E5, and probably this was theory in 1907. Castles. D5 attacks the knight via discovery. So bishop takes C6, knight takes, and well, I have to tell a funny story because I get paid by the hour. There's 2 players in Michigan rated between 2100 and 2250 named John Brooks and Bob Schiaffoni. They're about as opposite as you can get. Bob Schiaffoni plays very careful, knows 100 moves of theory, and all his games are 10 hours and they're all draws. And John Brooks is the opposite. He doesn't know any theory, he moves instantly every move, and he plays wild and crazy, and he likes to attack. And I would expect when they play that the wild and crazy guy would win because he would confuse the other guy. But no, the boring, slow, always drawing, never moving player actually has a good strategy, which he employs against the aforementioned player. He plays wild and crazy and sacrifices and attacks, and his opponent doesn't like that. And then he's defending all the time with probably good positions, but can't figure out how to defend, and the boring player actually wins all the time because the wild and crazy player doesn't get to play his kind of game. And that's what Lasker did in game 1 of this match. He played a sacrifice that's okay, but it was more than okay against Marshall because Marshall wants to sacrifice. For a guy known as a wild and crazy player, white doesn't have a lot of pieces developed. Okay, so he played rook e1, queen h4, threatening the f pawn, f6, opening up the f file for the rook, f3, and he sacrifices a piece with f takes e5. It's not a bad sacrifice, it's not winning, but it's very hard for Marshall to defend a piece up when the annotator, Kasparov, said, Marshall wants to have black here. He wants to attack down a piece. And the idea is, after you take the piece, I play d4. And now white has a decision to make. Does he give the piece back, or does he let black attack? And, well, this position's okay for black. Black has a lot of compensation for a piece, and white's queen side looks like he's one of Morphy's opponents. So, okay, so he played g3, and Kasparov gives a funny variation here. Bishop d2, bad move. Bishop g4 attacking the queen. Queen obviously moves away. And now rook f2. And you can see black has a lot of compensation for a piece, probably too much. And bishop g5, rook g2, check, and we're going to play bishop g2 mate, or queen g2 mate, or queen f3, and there's no defense. Okay, well, bishop d2 is sort of a silly move, but it saves the piece. Okay, instead, Marshall played g3. The queen moved to f6. Again, if the bishop moves, we got queen f2 and bishop h3, and we're attacking. So Marshall gave back the piece with bishop takes d4. The line Kasparov gives is bishop to d2, bishop to h3, threatening mate, 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 rook g1 forced, and bishop f1. Always play bishop f1. And I assume the idea is to play bishop e2 and bishop f3. That seems reasonable. Yeah. And, well, it actually says that. So can you guys see that? Oh, you guys can see it too. Yeah, I wasn't looking over there. It was too far away. It was like an inch away.
It just takes it.
Yeah, you could just take it. In fact, that's probably the best move. Unfortunately, I don't like this position. Whoops, I like this position. Okay. When Alejandro does that, it's funny. When I do it, it's not as funny. And then I assume rook d. Oh, actually, I assume this. I've changed my assumption. Yeah. And as they say on Sopranos, there's good and there's not good. That's not good. Yeah. So, well, again, looks like Morphy's opponent is white. Yeah. All right, so instead of the correct way of playing, which was that, and black has great compensation, Marshall gave back the piece, tried to marshal up his defense. No, hold on, let's wait for them to get it at home. Okay, they just got it at home. All right, and now material is equal, but again, all of white's pieces are on the first rank, and as I tell all of my students, when you have pawns on the dark squares, we need a bishop on g2, not a black bishop on g2, a white bishop. So in the long run, white's in a lot of trouble. Now, white doesn't want to get checkmated, because even in 1907, if you got checkmated, you lost. So he played rook f1 and traded everything off to a drawn endgame that wasn't very drawn. Okay, and now every move Lasker made a threat. That's tough. Played rook b8, threatening the b2 pawn. b3, rook b5. He's going to swing his rook over to h5 and a5 and e5 and attack all of those pawns. And to c5. And in fact, Marshall didn't want to lose his c2 pawn, so he very drastically played c4. Okay, he didn't know at the time that c4 was explosive, which we know now. No, nothing? No. Somebody give these people an encyclopedia. Okay, so c4, and then I like Kasparov's crazy annotations. He has a fantasy, was lost in the endgame desert. Wow. Okay, so yeah, he gives lots of other moves. He claims knight d2 is the best move. Then rook c5, which looks pretty annoying. Rook c1, bishop a6 check, and bishop d3 is pretty interesting move, taking advantage of the pin. Knight f3, takes, everybody takes everything. And, well, I would expect this would be a draw. That would be my expectation, although Kasparov never stops analyzing, so. And then he writes, etc. So there you go. Yeah, okay, but this has to be a draw. So Marshall has good drawing chances if he plays correctly, but endgame wasn't his forte. c4, rook h5 attacking the h2 pawn. The king defends it, and now c5, and black has a passed pawn, white has a weak e pawn, black's king can move up the board, and white's sort of tied down here and hasn't developed yet. So black has a big advantage. And black did move his king up, and his rook swung over to the other side of the board. Very annoying. And basically, white is just too passive. Black has a better rook, black has a better minor piece, black has a better king, and black has a passed pawn on d4. And the game, well, this reminds me of some of the games in this tournament. People aren't resigning when they should in a lot of games, the women's and the championship. And if you want a lesson in not resigning, you should look at the games from the early 1900s. They didn't resign until the computer found 10 ways to give checkmate. Okay, so this game has been over for a while because basically black is a king ahead. Black's king is all over the place, and white just can't move. But there's no resigning until you lose all of your pawns. So that's what happened. Yeah. Yeah, super grandmasters today don't like playing knight d2, knight b1. They don't do that. But yeah, the truth hurts. And yeah, now there's a lot of pawns going to queen. Okay, and now since we really can't stop f2 check, even Marshall resigned. Yeah. Yeah, a very good game from Lasker, and that was the first game of the match. And usually when you're white, even then you were trying to press for a win, but he was sort of on the defensive the whole game because Lasker sacrificed a piece and made Marshall defend, and piece sacrifice was probably sound. And that might have been one of the best games of the match. Well, I know what the worst game of the match was because I have it here. Okay, this was a very interesting game. Black was slightly better because white has a weak c-pawn. This was game 3. This was the next game that Marshall had white. Obviously, he's doing a lot better here than he was in the first game. And Lasker played knight e4, attacking the c-pawn as many times as humanly possible. And Marshall played knight takes f7 because that's how Marshall rolls. And when I looked at this game, I was like, did Lasker miss knight takes f7? And I was like, yeah, I think he missed knight takes f7. Okay, and the purpose of knight takes f7 is if you take it with a rook, you lose your rook on c8. And I would think if Lasker had seen knight takes f7, he probably wouldn't have done this. On the other hand, he does sacrifice the exchange to get an attack. It's not winning, but it's the kind of position, again, Marshall wants to have black. He wants to sacrifice an attack, and he doesn't like this defensive kind of stuff. So maybe Lasker did do it for psychological reasons. He took, sacrificing the exchange, and now he has to save his queen, but f4 is also hanging. And the problem with queen g4 is rook takes f4 seems quite annoying. So he played queen b7, and black isn't winning here by any means. It's just more pleasant to have black because black has a big attack, and if two supercomputers are playing, probably the game would end in a draw. But okay, 1907 defense wasn't the highest level, and it wasn't Marshall's forte. Now Marshall played pretty well, considering queen g5 was played. Black wants to play rook f2, and then probably hard to defend after that. So king h2 was played. Now he can play queen c8 check and queen g4. If you play rook f2, and my rook can slide over and defend. Queen g3 check, knight d2, threatening the rook on b1, and knight f3 check leading to mate. Queen takes d5 check, and king h1, the best move. So actually, Marshall's defending excellently so far. And Lasker played knight f3. So it's pretty funny. Lasker was known as a sort of a counterpuncher, and Marshall was known to sack all his pieces and play for mate. And in both games of the match where Marshall was white, the opposite happened. Lasker was sacrificing, playing for attack, not necessarily winning, but putting Marshall on his heels. Okay, you have to take the knight because queen h2 is mate. Check. And black plays for the win by playing the move rook f4. And black wants to play rook h4 with advantage. Yeah. And unfortunately for Lasker, he didn't find the best defense. Man, I don't blame him. I know the best defense and I forgot it, so I resigned. Yeah. I think the only move is queen h5. Yeah, and I think computer says it shouldn't end in a draw because if we trade the queen for the rook and white has two rooks for a queen, white has a pass d pawn. His king's pretty open, so that should be equal. But it's also possible Marshall saw queen h5 but played for the win, or as I like to say, played for the loss. Okay, and Nakamura would agree with me. Nakamura keeps talking about I shouldn't have played so aggressively against Caruana. Okay. I mean, that's what he does. So he didn't play queen h5, he played queen d8 check. And now, if black plays rook h4, that would be just like white playing queen h5, but now it's white's turn to move. So Marshall's like, oh boy, I have a free move. Unfortunately, he didn't see black's threat. Yeah, you should see your opponent's threat when they're mating you. Rook h4 is not the threat. Can somebody tell me what black does if it's black's turn to move? You at home?
Queen takes pawn.
Queen takes pawn, that's a good move. I don't know if it's the best move. It's a good move. I think he stopped that. Did he play rook f1? Yeah, he stopped that. He didn't see the other threat, which is even better. And actually, in my game with Fidel Corrales Jimenez, which I've mentioned on every lecture I've ever given, and when I'm walking down the street talking to myself, I was threatening rook on the h-file mate, and he stopped it because he's a grandmaster. And then I moved my rook somewhere else, threatening rook somewhere else on the h-file mate. And then he was like, oh. And that's what black did.
Oh, rook f5.
Yeah. Rook h4 was mate, now it's not. Now rook h5 is mate. Man, the truth hurts.
There's no way to stop that.
Well, the only move I see that stops queen 8, rook h5 is queen e8. Yeah? I don't see another move. Right? I don't see another one. And then, if I'm correct, and I'm not using my computer, so I'm a little afraid, I think this is checkmate.
It is.
Yeah. So, yeah. In fact, rook f1 made rook f5 even stronger because it took away f1 for the king. So he didn't see rook f5 because if he saw it, he wouldn't have played rook f1. So, yeah, Lasker was right. Marshall, good attacker, defender, not a good defender. Now, the last game was very strange. In fact, one of the reasons I have a lower opinion of Steinitz than maybe you do is I've seen some of the Steinitz-Chigorin games, and I have to unsee those games because those games weren't good. Now, for some reason, which I can't quite grasp yet, although I see it a lot at the lower level, Steinitz and a lot of other players of that era, they played fantastic games. Steinitz von Wartleben is one of the greatest games ever. However, they also played the worst. And you can see some of that here at the championship. Some of our favorite players from the past and present, like Gadakomsky, just making blunders he's never made before. Against Jeffrey Zhang and Wesley So, like just losing in one move, not seeing things. And a lot of the top players from the late 1800s, early 1900s, I'm like, wow, that's the greatest game ever. But if I look at all of their games, then I'm like, wait a minute, what happened? And the next thing I'm going to show you is not good. And I think when players are behind in a match, they tend to go crazy, and they know that if they keep drawing, they're going to lose the match. So they play a little too aggressively. And although Nakamura played too aggressively against Caruana, it was sort of a calm too aggressively. Here, Marshall went too far. Okay, and I'll show you the whole game. So yeah, back in the day, people played everything. Lasker would play e4, d4, c4, he didn't care. And then in the 60s and 70s, most of the players just played one move, and now they play everything. If any of the top 10 players in the world have white or black, you don't know what they're going to do. They could play any opening because they have to learn everything. That way, it's not that easy to prepare for them. Okay, so this was a Marshall? It was a French, and Marshall tried to play the Marshall Gambit. And there's two Marshall Gambits that I know, there might be more. There's the more famous one in the Semi-Slav where white plays e4 and sacrifices a pawn. But also in this position, Marshall liked to play the move c5, which nobody plays now. It's the Marshall Gambit. And then I guess after a while he said that's not good. But it's named after him and nobody's played it. I don't know the last time anybody played it, but it's called the Marshall Gambit and he played it. Now he played knight f6, which is the normal move. And in fact, this is from yesterday's game, this is So Nakamura. So there you go. And Lasker played a very unusual move. Lasker was a great psychologist. He tried to throw his opponent off, make moves he wasn't expecting. And he played bishop d3. It's a very strange move. It's played occasionally, but usually they're kidding. Okay, bishop d3 is not, okay, the main moves, if you look at any database, there'll be 10,000 games with e5 and 10,000 games with bishop g5. And when people are kidding, they take, which I've done, but I'm usually kidding. So, okay, and after bishop d3, Marshall couldn't help himself. Marshall's like, wait a minute, I can play an improved version of my Gambit. It's not a Gambit anymore. C5. So, well, this is much better than usual because the white queen isn't doing anything on the D file. The D pawns are all safe for black. Well, I don't know if I'd play C5, but okay, C5 is probably not that bad. And then after knight F3, okay, Marshall played very anti-positional, trying to win a pawn. And I tell all my students, don't ever make this move. So maybe I should tell them to make it, then they won't. Interesting. Reverse psychology. And he played C4. And black has pressure on the center. And so in the French defense, when you play C4, it's for the very specific reason you want to close the queen side. And often black puts his king on the queen side or starts advancing all of his pawns. Here he did it to win a pawn. Again, Lasker, the brilliant psychologist, sacrificing material every game, putting Marshall on the defensive. Okay, he took knight e5. Are we going to be able to save this pawn? I don't think so. So black has played a lot of moves, but only has one piece out. Lasker has 3 pieces out and is ready to castle, ready to play bishop g5 if necessary, ready to win his pawn back. C4 is not a good move. Bishop to d6, castles, a6. Okay, when you're behind in development, you don't keep making pawn moves. I actually have no idea why he played a6. Because if his idea is to play b5 and defend his pawn, white could take the pawn 2 different ways now. So a6 just looks like a terrible move. Knight takes c4, h6. Yeah. Okay, and then f3, just like in game 1, when Lasker played f6 to open up the file for his rook, same thing. Okay, now is this the position where he went totally crazy, or was it one more move? Let's see. Okay, it wasn't this move. Okay, EF, bishop f3. Great position for white. It looks like a black Mardimer, except white's not down a pawn. So white has open f file for his rook. White's knight on c4 is beautiful. White's bishop on f3 is beautiful. These pieces all terrible. Hard to get them developed. Very nice position for white. And Marshall went totally crazy here. I mean, unbelievable. Okay, he played bishop takes h2 check. Now, again, I said earlier in the lecture, I look at some of the games of the older players and they're just brilliant. And then I look at this game and I'm like, what? What's going on? This is a world championship match. Okay, now it's possible I'm not saying it's true. It's possible he thought queen c7 check won his piece back. If that's the case, then it's just a horrible blunder. If he did it on purpose, sacking a piece, I can't even explain how silly that is. Unfortunately, queen c7 check does not win the piece back because I play knight e5. So maybe he missed that. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe. If he didn't miss that and he intentionally sacrificed a piece, I don't even know what to say. Okay, I don't even know which is worse. And now h5 with a winning attack. Yeah. So this is a world championship match. This isn't a joke. So when you see games like this, the world championship match, you're like, wait a minute. The guys today are better than the guys a long time ago. Now, of course, Marshall didn't always play this badly. He has a lot of brilliant wins. He has the famous move with Levitsky. Which move was that?
Queen g3.
Queen g3, very good. Okay. In fact, in a similar game, I lost to Belyavsky. He played knight g3. It's very similar. And man, I didn't see knight g3. Wow, was that a good move? Anyway, h5, what? So I'm just hoping he thought queen c7 check won the piece and he missed knight e5. Otherwise, his judgment's not the best. Like if I was one of his sponsors, I'd be like, bishop and h5, get my money back somehow. So you can't checkmate your opponent when you have no pieces out, and your opponent has all their pieces out. Okay, so bishop f4. Now white has the initiative. Yeah, black, I mean, this is just like two little kids playing. But it's a world championship match. Like if my student was black and they were rated like 400, I'd be like, yeah, I told you not to sack a piece. Rook g8. It's hard to believe this is a world championship match. Takes, knight e4. And again, not resigning is weird. Now if you want to see something weird, do you? Marshall played knight d7. What would the brilliant chess players in the audience play now?
Knight d6 check.
Followed by
Rook takes pawn.
mate.
Oh, it's, yeah.
Yeah, that surprised the audience. Did you surprise you at home? Knight d6 check, either one. Rook f7 mate. Did Lasker play that? No. Yeah, I don't know. That's why, you know, we talk about the greatest players of all time. We have like Kasparov and Fischer and Carlsen and Karpov. And then these guys a long time ago, a little suspicious. Now, thing is, when you're so winning, you just don't care. So Lasker might have been like, well, he might have lost interest a long time ago. That's a good excuse, actually. Like if Lasker's like every legal move wins, then it doesn't really matter that he missed mate. Just strange mate to miss. Knight d6, rook f7.
Emanuel Lasker missed.
Yeah, look at this. He's getting mad over here. Yeah. Okay, so queen g4, also good. And there's a very slight possibility, very slight. He saw the mate, but let him suffer a little. Yeah, make him suffer. Okay. Knight e5 takes. King f8. Man, the truth hurts. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, but not resigning is also very strange. That's also weird. Yeah. Okay, and here he resigned, but like, why resign now? How's this different than every other position? Sometimes I'm playing somebody lower rated, like much lower rated, and I'm really winning. I'm up a lot. And then they're like hang a pawn, they're like, ah, and then they resign. And I'm like, what? You were down a rook and a bishop. What hanging the pawn has to do with anything? So, yeah, I don't blame Lasker for missing the mate because I think he lost interest in the game completely. But anyway, you can see that whoever backed Marshall probably wasn't too happy after that game. Like, wait a minute, I put money on you? Yeah. So some of the games were one-sided, and especially the World Championships a long time ago, because often the world champion picked their opponent, always a good idea, and also the opponent had to get backers and pay the prize fund, right? It was up to the opponent to secure financial backing so the match would take place. But that meant you had a chance to be world champion. If you had enough backers and money, the guy would play you for world championship. And some of Alekine's opponents were a bit iffy. But okay, nowadays, they're not kidding around. When you see a world championship match, it could go either way. Anand could beat Carlsen because he can get him in a couple opening traps because he prepared to move 30 and then draws the rest of the games. So anybody can win now. Can Karyakin beat Carlsen? No. Absolutely not. No, terrible. No, he's probably not going to win a game either. Man, Carlsen's good. But okay, it's not Anand again. That's something. But it would have been much nicer for everybody if it was Karawan, especially since, in theory, the match is in New York. In practice, I don't know. But in theory. When the mayor of New York said this match will be great, so it'd be weird to not have it in New York after the mayor says it's going to be great. So, I don't know. I guess it'll be in New York. There's probably a few people in New York who can afford it. And when I say a few, I mean hundreds. Yeah. When I say hundreds, I mean thousands. Yeah. See, can I go to millions? No, just thousands. Yeah. So the match is supposed to take place in November in New York, and that World Championship match will be higher quality than this one. Yeah. Now, since we've covered almost every World Championship match, and I did sort of a fake one last week, I did the semifinals since Fischer was very unlikely to play. So there was the de facto World Championship. We're going to probably start a new lecture series in May with other kinds of old players from the early 1900s, late 1800s, and talk about those guys. But World Championship matches were tough back then because, in the 1800s, early 1900s, they weren't really flying to the destination, and the conditions weren't the best, the prize money wasn't the best, and as you can see, the games weren't the best. But as you can also see, Lasker played pretty well, and Marshall, not as good. They did a computer study of all the world champions, and of the players before 1960, Lasker made very few errors. 10 times fewer errors than Steinitz. That's 10 times better is good.
Capablanca didn't make any good.
Capablanca didn't make a lot of errors, but he had a lot of draws too.
Paul Morphy didn't make a lot of that.
Well, Paul Morphy's my favorite, so yeah, Paul Morphy's the best. Right? If he played Frank Marshall now, let's see, I can't make a Prince joke, because for you, he just died today. For you guys, I can make a Prince joke for you guys, but not for them. They're still trying to handle it. For those of you who don't know, which is very weird if you don't, Prince died today, but okay. But for you guys, he died like 3 weeks ago. So,
Why did he
yeah.
die?
Well, they'll know when this video comes out, the people at home, but you won't know now. Yeah. Now it's just all lies, but in 3 weeks we'll know, right? Yeah. He'd actually been sick for a while, and he actually canceled some of his concerts. So my guess was he was at home instead of in the hospital. Probably in the hospital would have been safer, because he'd been sick for a while. But yeah. Okay, that's my Lasker Marshall lecture, and next week might have a World Championship match lecture. We'll find out.
Ben, is it possible that in that game right there, Marshall could have thought, I'm so badly developed, I might as well just start a pawn store?
Well, if you thought that, I'd give him less credit than I already gave him.
Yeah.
The only thing that makes any sense is he thought Queen C7 check won the piece back, and then he didn't see 95. And that's also strange.
I think you're right about that.
If he's like H5, G5, Rook G8, then then I'll play him a match, because he can't. That's just silly. Yeah. Yeah, because it's just silly. Well, thanks for coming to the lecture, and I'll see you guys next week. Yay.